Welcome to our Literature Corner, where we touch on Lucas Mangope, who was the leader of the Bophuthatswana. The territory he ruled over was distributed between the Orange Free State and what is now known as the Free State and the Northwest Province. He was also the founder and the leader of the United Christian Democratic Party, a political party based in the Northwest. Journalist Oupa Segalwe, who hails from the same village as Mangope, conducted wide-ranging research for almost a decade, enjoying unprecedented access to figures close to Mangope. Lucas Mangope A Life, he incisively examines the public and private life of this traditional leader-cum-elected politician, and he joins us in studio to tell us more. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning. Thank you so much.
Talk to us about the decision to actually write a book about Lucas Mangope and the decision to actually say, I'm going to put this together in a book.
Well, as you rightfully noted, I grew up in the same village where Kgosi Mangope came from, and as a young man, aged around 10, this is now 1994, I was exposed to a lot of conversations about his legacy. In my own household, he was quite revered as a politician. I was told that he had done all these good things for the people of Bophuthatswana, but this now, around about the time change was sweeping across the country, and there was uncertainty about what was going to happen post-1994. People saying those who had fought for the liberation were coming to take away all the good things that Kgosi Mangope had built for us. But at the same time, you had other views that actually the liberators are bringing about freedom for all of us, where we are going to enjoy equal rights with our white counterparts. And Kgosi Mangope was seen as one of those who were set on maintaining the status quo. So I grew up with that kind of contradiction, and as a much older guy now, I realized that there was a missing piece in the story of our transition from apartheid to democracy, in that his role was not really told in a book, and that's when I took it upon myself to do this work. But I've also been of the view that our political literature tends to focus more on the role played by those who were at the forefront of the liberation struggle. And that is not to say there's anything wrong with that, because as I always say, people tend to gravitate more towards heroes. But at the same time, I feel that we have to tell the story as a whole, including the role of other people who may not be seen in the same terms. Yeah.
Speak to us about the research that went into this, and how much information was there available for you to make sure that you put together this book and it's well researched and it's, it has all the facts in it.
One of the things that I regret the most is that I never got an opportunity to sit down with Kgosi Mangope and reflect on his legacy, because by the time I started working on this project, he was already of ripe age, and he was sickly, he was frail, and his memory wasn't at its best. So I had to rely on secondary sources. For instance, I sat down with some of the people he worked with under Bophuthatswana, a couple of former Bophuthatswana ministers. I also had access to his family, his children, his widowed wife, his extended family members, and the elders in Motswedi, the Bophuthatswana community. But I also spoke to, his political opponents in the ANC, people like Ntate Popo Molefe, the likes of Ntate Matthews Posa. I also spoke to the likes of Ntate Andrew Mlangeni, with whom Kgosi Mangope went to school at St. Peter's Secondary in Rosettenville. I also spoke to people that you could call his political allies, especially during the turbulent times of the late 80s, early 90s, people like Ntate F.W. de Klerk and Ntate Angosutu Buthelezi. Those are some of the people I spoke to, but beyond the interviews, I relied heavily on archives, records. I spent quite a lot of time in libraries and archive centers, both domestically and abroad.
What kind of leader was he, given the research that you did? Because there are, ways of you would describe the kind of leader he was. Some would have said he was a dictator to some extent, but what sense did you get the kind of leader he was?
I got the sense that he meant different things to different people. There are two extremes. On the one hand, you find people who held him in high esteem, in their view, no politician comes close to him. They call him a visionary, a developmentalist, and they reference the kind of infrastructure expansion that we saw in the 70s in Bophuthatswana going into the 80s. They refer to law and order that they say was there in Bophuthatswana, the opportunities, the industries that were built there. But on the other hand, you find other people who hold a different view to say, well, we see all of that infrastructure development, but because Bophuthatswana was very much an extension of apartheid in our view, that infrastructure expansion was nothing but the fruit of a poison tree. At the same time, they would say, well, we elect politicians into office to do exactly that, so we shouldn't be praising a fish for swimming. But at the same time, they refer to the repression that we saw in Bophuthatswana towards the end of the homeland systems, where those who held an opposing view about the so-called independence of those homelands were pushing back against that particular system, but their efforts were met with brute force on the part of the authorities of Bophuthatswana. But also there was instances of corruption in Bophuthatswana, as we saw during the Square Commission of Inquiry and the criminal trial of Mangope, which followed shortly thereafter.
And you know, one thing about, I was telling you that, you know, for us who grew up Kosoweto, Lucas Mangope was this figure that we knew of. We heard from our grandparents of this. But the one thing that came through, and for me personally, was that he loved his people. You know, Botswana came first for him. Was that the sense that you also got from him, that the people of Bophuthatswana always came first? He put them first.
That is right. That is why some of his critics refer to him as a Tswana nationalist. In other words, they saw him as this person who was only interested in the Botswana and their well-being to the exclusion of everybody else, which was at odds with what those who were at the forefront of the liberation struggle were all about, because they wanted to unite the black majority in South Africa who were disenfranchised until the advent of democracy.
What were the highlights for you of putting this book together?
Well, the highlights for me was, you know, the stories that I got to hear from some of the people I sat down with, people like Bo and Tate Andrew Mlangeni and all of that, who took me down memory lane about their experiences as young boys at St. Peter's Secondary School. He told me, for instance, that as township boys, they didn't really think much of their counterparts who came from the rural areas, such as Mangope, and to that extent they were bullied and called names and all of that. But through it all, Mangope managed to, you know, establish himself as a leader in the making, because you see him at St. Peter's being elected by the school community to be prefect, which was a huge responsibility for a young man like him, coming from the outposts such as Zerast, to be entrusted with that kind of responsibility, ensuring that there is order in the residences of the young men that were a part of the school at the time.
All right. Oupa Segalwe, thank you so much for talking to us. Congratulations on the book. Thank you so much for coming. Oupa Segalwe is the author of Lucas Mangope A Life. It highlights the leader of the most successful ethnic homeland of the apartheid era, Bophuthatswana.